Recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Law News, a weekly news webinar and podcast brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. Just a little reminder for those who are new, Digital Law is a small law firm based in Barnsley in the UK, and we specialise in online, cyber and data protection law. So I'll just pass over to Peter to introduce himself and tell you a bit more about the podcast today.
Thank you, Laura. My name's Peter. I'm the Solicitor Managing Director at Digital Law, and we are operating in that sort of sphere between where, if you think of the Venn diagram of between law and technology, where the two circles meet in the middle. So as you can imagine, we're doing a lot of work for our moment on for our clients around everything from data adequacy to data protection, cyber security, and also around data issues with regards to, of course, the UK leaving the European Union. So lots to keep us busy at the moment and lots of really interesting stories for us to cover this week.
Great, thank you, Peter. So starting with our first story this week then. So I think we covered this in last week's or maybe the week before. No, sorry, I'm on about a different story there. So the first one is about Spotify. We'll get to the other one later in the thing. But yeah, so Spotify are launching rolling reset on customer accounts passwords that have been linked to a data leak. So basically a third-party server has been uncovered by researchers, VPN Mentor. And this server and database is found to have 72 gigabytes of data on, which contains 380 million records made up of login credentials and other user data. And some of this data has been validated against the Spotify service. So according to VPN Mentor, the data does not actually belong to the database, does not belong to the music streaming service itself. It seems to be that a third party has accumulated this data along with other companies' data and been storing it on a database. So it potentially stolen data that has been stolen in a previous hack or a previous cyber attack from Spotify, and then placed on this server to be used for hijacking user accounts later on. So it is estimated that roughly 300,000 to 350,000 accounts of Spotify users were embroiled in this leak. And the actual story on the website as well does go into what information this includes. So it includes the email addresses, countries of residence, usernames and passwords of those Spotify customers.
Thanks, Laura. I thought this was, in terms of timing, I don't think this could have been any worse really for Spotify. I mean, there's never a great time for news that the information about your account holders, and in some instances this could be premium account holders as well, don't forget, because just to many of those users will have set up accounts so they can access everything on the platform. But this week in the UK Parliament, there was a hearing before a select committee where 3 music artists attended to talk about the current state of the music industry. And they were very honest in coming forward and saying, everyone thinks that if you're in a band or you're a solo artist, you must be making loads of money. And they went, it really hasn't been the case. And this isn't just a COVID thing. This has been over the course of the last 10, 15 years, where as music has moved away from buying a physical item to it being streamed via music services like Spotify, these artists have been saying, look, we end up losing quite a significant percentage. I mean, the royalties from a stream or a download are small anyway, and then something like sometimes 30% of that or more can end up going to a platform. Don't forget, a record label will still want its take as well. So in terms of the actual royalty that gets back to the artist, that can be very, very small. And when I say very, very small, like not actually sufficient for a fairly successful artist to be even able to afford rent payments or mortgage payments and to be able to actually sustain themselves. And when you think about it, there is no industry without those content creators, those creative people coming up with the actual product in the first place. And you have to ask yourself, if the artists aren't making any money out of it, and the consumers are then running the risk of having platforms like Spotify hacked and their personal details leaked online, at what point do these services stop being a winner? At what point do we decide, well, who's actually making anything out of this? Because if the artists are living virtually in penury, what you might be saying, oh, well, this is just, people that aren't doing very well. Well, one of the people who was speaking was Guy Garvey, who's the lead singer of Elbow, a group that's been going for the best part of 20 years and has had a string of hits over the years and over the decades. And he was making it quite clear the reason why he has to also moonlight as a DJ on BBC Six Music is to pay the bills. And if things are that bad, that's really not great when you've been in the industry that long and you're simply not making much in the way of money out of it. I think that's a pretty stinging indictment on the state of it as a whole. And if we bring it back then to Spotify, the same week you've had a artist in Parliament saying this really isn't working for the creative sector, the fact that it's not working for the users as well is really not good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it brings it back, what you were mentioning about the thing in Parliament, brings it back to the other tech firms that we've been speaking about over the past couple of weeks to do with the Commission being so high, and how the EU Digital Services Act may actually have an impact on that, and in a positive way.
Indeed. So I think, was it last week we were talking about the fact that the developer Epic Games behind Fortnite is taking Apple to court over this.
Yeah.
And Apple has already unilaterally reduced the amount of commission it charges, taking it down from 30% to 15% on its game platform for, I think, developers that are turning over less than 5 million, I think. But it's interesting that already you've got some of those gatekeepers, as the EU is calling them, i.e. large tech corporations, providing a window to the vast number of users out there, facilitating that access, actually saying, look, we're actually going to come down and regulate the way that you are acting and providing that access. And a general reminder, the EU Digital Services Act is published next week, should be on the 2nd of December. And it will be very interesting to see exactly what is in there. Already there is a discussion around, well, what actually defines a gatekeeper? Because before now it's been, very large tech companies that provide access to online to potentially other organizations. So certainly I think Facebook, Amazon, Apple, but it gets quite interesting if you start thinking, well, what about Airbnb? That's providing access to all of those who are wanting to then rent out properties, and you'll know from Airbnb sometimes there's some very big properties on there being let. What about Deliveroo, that's providing access online, particularly this year, to all of those who are wanting to offer takeaway meals? What about, in this instance, Spotify, giving access to those who wish to download this for all the artists and music labels? And it'll be interesting to see how broadly the regulation therefore decides it's going to apply. Is it going to try and take on the Spotifys and the Airbnbs and the Deliveroos, or is it just going to be those particularly big California tech companies? This is one of the things we'll be interested to see as soon as next week. But the thing over as well with EU legislation is sometimes what's published is not what's finally passed. So don't forget that GDPR, published in 2012, took 4 years to get anywhere near the European Parliament, and by the time it did get to the European Parliament, lots of things have been watered down. Don't forget the original version of GDPR said every single data protection breach must be reported. It also said all organisations processing data would have to have a data protection officer, and those things all ended up being watered down by 2016. So it will be interesting to see what's proposed in case the EU has specifically put it in at a very high level, intending to allow space for it to roll back. But the other thing that I think everyone listening will have to think about is, just because I'm talking here about EU legislation, if you're in the UK, you might think, well, that doesn't matter, we're leaving Europe. This stuff will apply if you're looking to sell your goods and services in the European single market. For those, I know we have a listener in North America, in Canada. So, for our listener in Canada, this will apply, the EU Digital Services Act, when it comes to selling goods and services in the single market. So it's almost like you might not be within the single market, but it's sphere. You know, if you're in its orbit, it will, and you're still looking to utilize it. Obviously, its regulations will still have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like this week we found out at university that we've got another module added on this year, and it was EU law. And a lot of people said, why are we doing EU law? We're leaving the EU. Like, why is this relevant anymore? And I just said, because it still does apply. Like, because the single market is so close knit and everybody wants to be in that market, we still need to learn about it because it's still relevant.
Exactly. So my background, for those of us watching our video, is of our offices at the Digital Media Centre, and there's loads of different businesses in there, tech companies, tech startups. If you're going to be successful, you're going to want to grow that market and start selling your goods and services, not just in the domestic market, but internationally. And we've spoken to businesses in the DMC that end up selling everything from, you know, very straightforward goods and services all over the world. But if you're going to do that, the market on your doorstep is still Europe. So you're still going to have to comply with that. Albeit it means that businesses that do not wish or are not selling to Europe don't have to do it. So, you know, the person operating a corner shop doesn't have to worry. But if you're operating online digitally, yeah, it's something that you have to take account of.
Absolutely. And staying with the EU then, just moving on to our next story. So this is regarding EU's eyes tighter grip on data in tech sovereignty push. So this has been, there's some leaked documents that have highlighted the Commission's move towards keeping data in Europe. So this is the whole idea of data localization and Europe's push to assert sovereignty over technology is starting to take shape around the question of data and who controls it. So while the bloc still remains prominent of free trade, new rules are being unveiled that propose restricting the flow of certain types of data outside of the bloc. So like I said, data localization. So the upcoming Data Governance Act is actually aiming to create a new infrastructure for sharing sensitive data between individuals and public agencies, which the Commission hopes will create a single market for data. So I think this article also referenced the fact how this is like very relevant at the moment, as hospitals all around the single market, as they're calling it, and will be able to share data amongst each other to actually help the battle with coronavirus. So hopefully this seems like a good thing, but may have some restrictions as well.
Indeed. These are quite interesting proposals, particularly when it comes to things like the Data Governance Act, very much changing some of the principles that are enshrined within GDPR and how that ends up being regulated. So it's interesting that while there is the general principle around data and the way that it is being regulated within GDPR, the fact that this is looking at these issues with regards to localization is an interesting step.
Yeah.
And this is one of the issues, of course, that has been core to the UK with regards to their ongoing negotiations with the EU to say, look, we may end up wanting to adopt certain EU principles like GDPR, which is now incorporated into UK law. But for example, after we've left, what if the EU then passes this Data Governance Act or the Digital Services Act for that matter? The UK is looking to be able to say, look, just because we may have taken on these laws in the past, we now wish to be separate and not to have that element of regulatory alignment and pass those same laws into our into UK law. So at least then tradespeople in the UK wouldn't have to comply, but you still have to comply if you are then looking to sell goods and services within that digital single market. Some of the principles in here are quite draconian. I think one of the key ones is that they potentially talk about saying that if you are looking to process the data of EU citizens, you actually have to have physical infrastructure within the European Union to process that data.
Yeah.
Some commentators have turned around and said that is really strict. Of course, at the moment, an awful lot of US corporations are processing the data of EU citizens, but of course they're doing it from California. They haven't necessarily taken the step of setting up processing within Europe. A lot have, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, but others haven't. And to actually turn around and say, you have to have a physical presence within our borders, is a step. Even China hasn't done that. Even China hasn't turned around and said, you have to have a physical presence in China in order to process the data of Chinese citizens, for example. So it's quite a major step for the EU to be turning around and taking this sort of action, or making these proposals. But I think the key bit of context to bear in mind is what we were just saying about the Digital Services Act under the previous story, whereby it may be going in at a very high level, a draconian level, to then be able to wind back some of the proposals during the course of negotiations and lobbying to reach a more acceptable mid-ground compromise. But certainly, when we think about some of the key things within GDPR, which are probably the rights that are associated with it, everything from the subject access, the data subject rights, the right to data being rectified, the right to it being deleted, enshrining that and developing those rights further in this through the Data Governance Act would be the next logical step in terms of the direction of travel, to give citizens more control over how their data is then being collected, stored, processed, and transmitted online. So it does make the next logical step. But let's see how what actually ends up being proposed, and then what then happens during the course of the lobbying. Let's remember, GDPR had over 2,998 or 99 amendments made to it during the course of those 4 years, from when it was published in draft to when it actually became was passed by the Parliament in 2016. So it could take several years of lobbying and thousands of amendments. Let's see what happens with this. The more contentious an issue, the more amendments tend to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say that we'll be able to speak about what it covers next week, but I think we might be able to touch on it, but not go into too much detail, because obviously that'll change quite a lot.
I think we have to give the usual lawyer's answer of, it will all depend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so moving on to the next story then. So this is the one that we covered a couple of weeks ago now, regarding Ticketmaster. So a couple of weeks ago, ICO actually fined Ticketmaster £1.25 million for a data breach. And now Ticketmaster have come back and are trying to argue this, basically. So there was fine earlier this month. However, they are trying to insist that they are not liable to a customer for the compromise of its network. So I think we were discussing this earlier, Peter, and the whole problem is here that they're probably trying to fight off the civil mass action claims that we speak about quite a lot. And there's also some arguments of whether the fine should be given under GDPR or the old Data Protection Act, which they're actually trying to argue that if it would be the old Data Protection Act, they wouldn't be responsible. But obviously, as we know, that there wasn't actually that many changes between that, and they would still be liable, but the fine might be considerably less.
Indeed, this is quite an interesting defence that Ticketmaster are trying to run with here. So, you know, individual data subjects are getting in touch and saying, we feel that we are entitled to compensation for this, and they're turning around saying, no, that we've been fined here because GDPR applied to part of the period, the window during which our system was being infected with this malware. And therefore saying, you know, oh, your data was affected before the 25th of May 2018. Therefore, GDPR doesn't apply. Therefore, we don't have to pay you anything. This struck me as the sort of defence that you put into written correspondence with a claimant to try and dissuade them from continuing with their action, but knowing full well that you have not a hope in hell. But it sounds impressive and might get the writer to back down. But we've talked about the fact that there are an increasing number of law firms and claims farmers out there that are starting up these class actions, and that as a result they should be considering the rights that they can have. And in this instance, GDPR doesn't really apply, because yes, they've been fined under GDPR, but if that hadn't applied, it would have been under the old Data Protection Act 1998, and they would still have been fined under that as well, because they're in breach. They just wouldn't have been fined 1.25 million. They'd have been capped at 500,000. But the principle is that they had failed with some fairly basic fundamental duties of data protection to keep the personal data of the data subjects safe using reasonable care and skill. So, if you're then going to look at potentially making a class action, that GDPR doesn't say, congratulations, you can make a class action and everyone can claim thousands of pounds. That's based on case law. And it's based on case law that came in before GDPR. So best of luck to Ticketmaster on that. But it could be that, as I say, this is just pre-action correspondence. And if you end up then getting anywhere near serious negotiation before a hearing, or indeed at a hearing, I think this is a defence that will pretty quickly begin to melt. But best of luck on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So just moving on to the next one, but staying on the data breaches. So this is a data breach that's happened, I think it was discovered earlier this week by the Bristol City Council, which has left a number of parents livid and upset. So basically what had happened is somebody from the council had sent a list of names and email addresses of children who are disabled and have special needs out via a mass email. So it looks like that the email itself shouldn't have been sent to these people, but not only that, it has been sent through CC rather than BCC. So not only have all these parents received information about maybe their child along with other people's children as well, they've received everybody's email address as well as that. So the council director responsible for children and families, Anne James, has actually apologised to the parents and has asked everyone to delete the message that they have received. And in a letter, they have acknowledged that this was a GDPR breach and have said that it was a human error. They have reported it to the ICO, and the ICO will now be investigating and making recommendations.
Thanks, Laura. I felt this story was very much a walk down memory lane.
Yeah.
If we were doing our digital law podcast back in 2013, 2014, all of the fines and the data protection breaches we'd have been talking about would have all been related to the public sector. Under the old Data Protection Act, so the big fines were sort of for NHS hospital trusts and local authorities that were doing things like mailing out reports to the wrong recipient. We should have sent these medical records or this particular report to this individual, and instead we've sent the wrong report to the wrong person, or the covering letter had one person's details on and a different report was attached. That was very often the nature of a lot of the data protection breaches that used to occur.
Yeah.
Now, of course, recent listeners of our podcast and watchers of our webinar will know that we're talking about companies like Ticketmaster and British Airways and Marriott Hotels. It's been very much the private sector that's been walloped quite heavily when it's come to data protection fines and enforcement. So to suddenly go back to a local authority getting it wrong in a fairly big way like this is a reminder of what life used to be like. But it's also a reminder of the fact that this stuff can be done very, very easily. And I almost felt with this story, I wonder how many data protection breaches still go unreported because the recipients of emails where, for example, it has been sent via courtesy copy rather than blind copy, whether people simply haven't picked up on the fact that this data has been breached, that you have suddenly seen the long list of recipients, or that the wrong people have received it. How often does this happen? Does this actually happen? And people just aren't cognizant of it and don't realise it. So in this instance, we only know about it because the parents of the children were so distraught that the special educational needs of their children have been broadcast like this. But as I say, how often is it not picked up? I think that would be an interesting bit of research to actually find out how much stuff goes unreported or reported for a prolonged period of time, because it's simply not as contentious as it is in this instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, this relates back to a conversation we were having earlier and a couple of weeks ago on this, about how like cyber attacks and data breaches have changed over time, like you've just been said. a lot of the data breaches we see now are always less human error and more the ransomware and like cybersecurity attacks of somebody actually maliciously trying to steal that data and then maybe releasing that, or like we've seen before with Ticketmaster, Spotify, putting it onto a database for other people to view. So I think it just shows that these attacks, these data breaches still do happen, and it is just a human error that happens sometimes.
It is. We used to call it the sort of the non-malicious insider who's simply made an error. You know, how often when you're, for example, typing in the list of recipients and, you know, Outlook starts populating it for you. So, for example, Laura, when I'm sending you an email, sometimes it's saying, you know, I'll get 5 different Lauras that come up on there, and I have to make sure each time that I'm making sure I send it to the right person. Until I ended up working out how to disable that feature. But it's, you know, that's one of the things that can make it very easy for someone who is working potentially, you know, if they're tired and they're working to a deadline, how often does stuff end up being sent to the, you know, that wrong person being copied in, or the wrong person being the recipient? And it's not that the sender has intentionally done that. It's entirely unintentionally, entirely without any malicious intent. It's simply happened, as it says there at the very end of the article, due to human error.
Yeah, absolutely. So just moving on to our next one then. So this is about a Android app that people are being warned that they need to delete it because their videos and photos and private messages are at a risk of being leaked. So the US cybersecurity buffs have warned in a new report that the Go SMA Pro messaging app actually exposes the private photos and videos of its users due to a major security flaw. So the bug was reported to the creators by a research company, Trustwave, back in August, who then gave them a 90-day deadline to fix the issue before they would then out them, basically. And after that date had passed, without hearing back or seeing an improvement in the actual service, Trustwave have shared the results of their online finding online, warning that the Go SMS Pro should be deleted and has been leaking these files. So they have said that any sensitive media shared between users of the messaging app is at risk of being compromised by an authenticated attacker or curious user.
Indeed, thanks for that, Laura. And it's interesting where this story's come from. Of course, this is one that's from the Sun. If it's in the Sun, it must be true. But interesting that they flagged this up. But I think that the key takeaway is a little reminder, really, that if you do have sensitive data in your private videos and photos, best not to leave them on your phone. Even best to either get rid of them, delete them, but sometimes even deleted images can easily be found and restored by hackers. So, you know, when it comes to really sensitive information, think very, very carefully about the device and medium that you are putting it onto, because so often we see this where different apps end up going through the contents of a phone, looking at all of the photos, looking at all of the audio recordings, looking at, for example, all of the SMS text messages. Even though the app might have nothing to do with communication or text messaging, there'll be really invasive things within the app that are looking at everything from the text messages to all of the GPS data associated with that phone, all of the mobile phone masts it's ever connected to. All of this tracking data is very often picked up and squirreled away by some of the more nefarious apps that are out there. And this could just be, you know, a straightforward app in this instance, you know, the SMA Pro messaging app. It turns out that it's, you know, mining quite deeply into the information in your phone. So, you know, the general message here is, A, think carefully about the devices that you are downloading apps to, the provenance of which you can't necessarily be entirely sure of. And then also, you know, if you're taking something, you've got, you know, really sensitive information, even in relation to everything from banking to where you live, to the number plate of your car, to the identities of friends, family, children. Think quite carefully about whether you really want to have that on the mobile device. And you might be thinking, well, of course I do, because that's where I'm going to be, you know, all the photos that I'll end up using and keeping of close family, friends and loved ones. Well, you know, is it worth actually having a separate device that you use for that that might potentially be air gapped, or that you don't then end up downloading loads of different apps onto? Let's face it, very often we end up changing our mobile phones within 2 or 3 years anyway. So, and sometimes you've got phones and tablets as well. So sometimes is it better having an air-gapped tablet or phone that you use for personal photos, banking information, etc., that then doesn't have other more broadly available apps downloaded onto it? So, you know, we come across these sorts of stories very often. It's just a reminder of how invasive some of these apps really can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes things like this can just be found by looking at the security that they've got on their system. So a lot of when we're writing privacy policies and other privacy like stuff, documents for our clients, we always include the security that's in them. A lot of companies don't, but some do. So when they're not explaining the security they have on their products and services and everything, that I think that just highlights the issue there as well. If they're not willing to say what security is on there, it's probably not a lot or anything at all.
Indeed. I mean, particularly with some apps that might be you know, not particularly well known, the number of times we get developers who come to us saying, oh, I'm just using this privacy policy I used from someone else's app or website, and you go, okay, put that down, leave that over there. Let's actually draft something that relates to what your system does and what data it's actually collecting. But it seems to be a very common practice, and that's sometimes the giveaway. So if you end up going onto some apps and thinking, oh, I wonder what the privacy itself, if it comes up with some just totally generic rubbish, then you know really not to trust it, because they've not gone to that element of due diligence. But and indeed, how often have we spoken to clients where we've actually said, can you confirm where your servers are located and what encryption is in place and what measures? And very often the actual developer whose system it is doesn't actually know. They've then got to go and speak to other members of staff, their tech team, to actually confirm this information. So it's not a process that appears to happen organically. It's only when we sort of push people to do it very often that it actually happens. So that indeed can be a bit of a giveaway.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is our, oh, gone one too far. So this is the last story of the day. So this is regarding Tesla and a Belgium security research that have actually hacked into the Tesla using Raspberry Pi. So the electric automaker, so car maker Tesla, has rolled out an over-the-air patch for its Model X vehicles after being informed of a serious vulnerability in its keyless entry systems, which could have enabled criminals to circumvent $100,000 or pounds cars on board security systems. So the vulnerability was actually identified by the Belgium researchers and academics. So basically what they had done is taken the model key fob and actually used that to change it and actually gain access to the Bluetooth low energy communication standard. So I think what they've actually done is created something that can bypass that, and it has only cost them $195. So if you think of that in comparison to the amount of the car, I mean, it could gain a lot of people who have the right mind a lot of money, and make others lose a lot as well.
Indeed, thanks, Laura. This story may as well have been tailor-made for our listener in Bloomsbury who really likes his cars. This is, I think, quite a fascinating story about the fact that you can spend, you know, $100,000 on a Model X or a Model S, and you know, Tesla is clearly making Mr. Musk a lot of money at the moment. Elon Musk, don't forget, became the world's second richest man this week, based on the massively rising share price around Tesla. But the cars have this vulnerability. This isn't the first time we've heard of vehicles that have keyless entry being somewhat easily compromised. What is surprising in this instance is simply how easily it has been done. The Raspberry Pi is a little circuit board that costs anything from $15 to $20 and isn't particularly difficult to operate. It only takes a little bit of tuition to start using it. And then, of course, they've salvaged the engine control unit, the ECU, from a Model X. And you might think, well, there's not many Teslas out there. But the thing is Tesla's now been around for the best part of 10 years. And I hate to say it, the issue with regards to battery vehicles has been and remains not the range of the battery, it's how long it lasts.
Yeah.
And therefore, some of those Teslas that were first to hit the road, some of those very nice, very smart Model X's, you suddenly find that they're only good for sort of 500, 600 charges. And then you've got to get a new vehicle. And you can't even sell the old one on. It's only good for scrap because the battery isn't protected. So that means there is a supply out there of existing Tesla electronics for those who know where to look. And in this instance, it's possible to get hold of that ECU, use a Raspberry Pi to manipulate it, and surprise, surprise, you can walk off with another Model X from someone's driveway or from a garage forecourt. When you think this is supposed to be the next generation of automotive technology, and it's lovely driving in a Tesla. They've got the fastest acceleration of any production vehicle, and it's a really unique experience. You'd think that the security on it would have been designed with sort of fail-safes to stop this happening. And then when you see that it's actually the security is built around Bluetooth, you think, well, I'm not sure I would have made that architecture decision. We've talked in the past about Bluetooth being compromised comparatively easily. And I mean, any of our listeners, if you feel free to disagree with us and contact us and let us know if you've got a different view on this. But the fact that this has happened, it's easy to do so early on, and it doesn't strike me as something that you can easily put together a patch to get around it. Shows that there's a fairly glaring vulnerability, but I'm afraid that shows, well, if that's been found, what other vulnerabilities are there as well in these rather expensive vehicles that, as I say, have a very finite lifespan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if there's vulnerabilities with the Teslas that have got the keyless entry as well, there's many cars, other electric cars, hybrid cars, in even like petrol and diesel cars. I know my brother's car, his is keyless entry. Makes you wonder how easily people can get in those as well. I know that Ford cars, I think it was the ST line, they had a lot of problems with people being able to copy the key because that's based on Bluetooth as well. So yeah, I mean, I think this will give a lot of car companies thought.
Yes, and I say it's the fact that we always talk about hacking being something that is undertaken very easily using cheaply available tools off the dark web. Well, this was done cheaply with cheaply available tools in the real world. So it's a hack using practical equipment you can touch, but the principles are still the same. But the rewards are also very high if you get to drive off with a Tesla without having paid $100,000 for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's everything we've got time for today. So just wanted to quickly remind everyone about the special offer that we have on at the moment. So this is for our GDPR compliance manual for legal practices. So this was originally came on sale in 2018 when GDPR came into force for £195, but are now being on 50% discount down to £99. So it's also available in hard copy and digital copy just for an extra £5 for postage and packaging. So over to you, Peter, just to explain a little bit more.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, so this is our GDPR compliance manual that contains forms and templates and checklists to make the burden of trying to go through those measures to comply with the practical requirements of GDPR and data protection best practice. So it actually contains the GDPR is very good at telling you, well, this is the standard we want you to be at, but it doesn't tell you how to get to it. This manual does that. It sets out a very clear framework, and also gives very clear indicators from anecdotes about what works in terms of good practice and also examples of poor practice, so you can learn from the mistakes that other people have made. So that's available there. One other thing that our listeners might be interested in, I will be speaking at the LegalX 2020 conference next week, and I'll be discussing data adequacy, Brexit, and international data transfers. So that is for the LegalX conference. If you just Google LegalX, LEGALEX 2020, you can register for free, and I'll be speaking for approximately 25 minutes and then taking questions and answers at the end. So if you'd like to register for that, as I say, it's free. Please do feel free to register and ask me any questions on the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And yeah, we will be posting about that and some of the other things that are coming up on social media as well. So that's digital law on both LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook as well. So thank you for everyone for listening. And just a reminder, this is available on as a webinar through our YouTube and website, and on as a podcast as well through so Spotify, Apple Music, and any other podcast channel. So thank you for listening, and we hope to see you next week.